Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And today, well, we took a little bit of a vacation here and kind of let the rest of the Climbing the Pocket team handle draft season here. But we wanted to jump in, make a couple points, discuss that number one pick in the first round that the Vikings have. Go through a few other things as well, as, including Kwesi's tendencies and things that we just simply don't know a whole lot about. This is going to be a draft that's very exciting for Vikings fans for a number of reasons. First and foremost, because after free agency, it looks like this team might actually have a chance to contend. We could talk, some of that is, of course, what the Packers have done this offseason as well, but the Vikings have a very real shot here if they're able to connect on a couple of these rookie players. So we'll talk a little bit about that and just kind of the overall nature of this particular draft. I mean, I feel like as a Vikings fan, I've been watching Rick Spielman draft for 15 years now, I believe, since the Triangle of Authority started. And we get something fresh now, completely new perspective. So we'll talk a little bit about Kwesi and what he did in Cleveland and some of the tendencies that we might get from him this time around. But kind of just a draft primer from us. Before we do that, the real draft primer, folks, will be held at Lake Monster Brewing. That's on April 29th on Friday. Coming up quick here. Honestly, came a lot faster than I thought. Our guys on the team will be doing a 3-day event of live coverage. You can see on the Climbing the Pocket Twitter right now that they've got people from our team across the board, at least 3 guys in every time slot from 7 p.m. on Thursday all the way through 5 p.m. on Saturday. So we got you covered for the draft for sure, even if Drew and myself have not done the best of jobs doing that with our podcast as of late. But everyone from Tyler and the rest of the team will be on board with doing the draft. Come on down to Lake Monster, join the team. They'll have some giveaways. Obviously, amazing beer down at Lake Monster, and then you can have an opportunity to, meet, hang out, and just have a good time. So that's April 29th, Friday, from 5:30 to 10 p.m. at Lake Monster Brewing. Make sure to check that out. All right, let's jump in here with the Vikings draft. Like I said, Drew and I have not done a whole lot of coverage here, and that's because that's not exactly our forte. That's not what they're paying us the big bucks for. I have to laugh at that. But we do have opinions, as does everyone here. And the Vikings are in a very interesting position this year, as I mentioned during the introduction here. New GM, new front office, rebuilt squad. And they're still looking to contend by all means, right? By all accounts, from everything we've seen this offseason, the Vikings are looking to attack. And the opportunity is going to be there with Chicago in full rebuild mode, the Lions being the Lions, Green Bay losing Devontae Adams, the Vikings bringing in a couple of priority guys, specifically Zadarius Smith. Kirk Cousins, of course, is returning. The Vikings have a boatload of potential. It's just we as fans have seen it be unrealized potential for so long now that I think some of us are still a little bit pessimistic, myself included. But that being said, if the Vikings are able to connect on 1 or 2 of their picks, it doesn't even necessarily need to be the first round. Get a couple starters in there that can be important role players in their first season. The Vikings have a real chance here to dethrone the Green Bay Packers. So the first question on my head that I'm sure everyone's thinking about all the time is, what do the Vikings need to do? And that's a very open-ended question here. And I don't think there is just one answer. But when you have a top 15 draft selection, and you have an opportunity to rebuild defense with the type of prospects that are going to be available to this team, the question really boils down to, do you take a guy at number 12, or do you try to solidify one of your holes? Interior offensive line, cornerback is an obvious one. I guess what would you say? Just without any backing of statistics, without any analytics, without any real diagnosis here, what does your mind's eye tell you that the Vikings should be leaning towards this draft season?
Yeah, well, I think I'm with everybody that kind of looks at the roster breakdown. You see cornerback as a glaring issue. It's not hard to kind of put that position under the microscope a little bit. And you see Patrick Peterson there. And then after that, you kind of don't see a whole lot that you can trust. So I think that's where the problem that the Vikings have put themselves into already is, they are not probably, with cornerback position, you rarely get a guy that can contribute right away, like meaningful snaps.
Right.
Vikings have seen that the last couple of years drafting themselves. So it's already a problem. But even looking down the future, you got to take a chance on somebody. So I think that's where the conversations, of Stingley have come up quite a bit, and he's been linked to the Vikings a ton. Vikings fans seem to kind of really like him as an option. There's obviously the LSU connection there as well throughout the entire defensive side of the ball. It seems like between Hunter, between Peterson. And so that, I mean, that's going to be the favorite, I think. But I am still in on, I kind of had this stance last year. And I still kind of feel that way about it too. The wide receiver position is a sneaky one that I think the Vikings should also target. Just given the way things are in the league right now, with how much receivers are getting paid, you're seeing quarterbacks and wide receivers get big deals. And then, I mean, we hate to say it, we don't want to admit it, but there is that possibility Jefferson leaves in a couple of years, or at least, 2-3 years, and that his deal is up, right? And you still want to have a viable option there. And at that point too, probably Thielen will not be the player he is now, right? So you have to have that option there. And that's a position you always want to be thinking ahead on, kind of like cornerback, where you need to have elite players there to compete. And so I am good with a lot of these, a ton of prospects. Olave is one that's probably going to be available at 12 that I like a lot. So I wouldn't mind that option either. So really cornerback or receiver, you get those athletes. I think that's who you target with that number 12 spot, should the Vikings stay there.
Yeah, and that's the big question, is whether or not the Vikings should stay there. I don't think there is a definitive answer, but there's so many different ties to what the Vikings need. And I think you bring up a really good point here, whereas that draft strategy has kind of evolved into being a singular focus alongside salary cap strategy in the last 3, 4, 5 years or so. As players have begun to make bigger chunks of the salary cap, cap hits are hitting that 30% mark, which is ridiculous, by the way. You have to sort of you have to have a little finesse with your draft strategy, in that you're not just trying to draft the best overall player. You're not just trying to draft a player that fits a need of yours. You're also trying to draft a player that's going to provide long-term value at a financial discount. And that's why we've talked about it on this podcast. I'm sure everyone and their mothers have heard people talk about the idea of drafting a rookie quarterback and building a team around him within those first 4 years with that 5th-year option. Try to get something done in that time period. And that's how you build your rosters without that huge salary cap hit for quarterback. What Drew's bringing up now is that the wide receiver position is becoming arguably as big of a problem in that regard. You see the paycheck that Devontae Adams just got, of course, the trade to Miami and the kind of the forced split up of the Kansas City Chiefs because of the amount of money that Tyreek Hill is being paid. I mean, yes, do these teams have options? Of course. But do they want to lose their number one target? They're arguably the best player on these rosters to some degree outside of Rodgers and Mahomes. And there's going to be others as well. It's not just these two players. I mean, we've heard the talks with Stephon Diggs. He ultimately got the deal and stays in Buffalo. That's one outcome, and that's probably the preferred outcome. But let's be real here. Jefferson could be the opposite outcome, regardless of how well the Vikings do. And if the Vikings aren't contenders this year and not contenders the years after that, it's that much more likely that a guy like Jefferson is going to move on. So having a backup plan is probably the smart decision. I don't necessarily know if it needs to be done in the first round, but if there's a guy there, you've got these different schools of thought all contributing into what you're going to do with your draft pick in the first round. The obvious one that fits all the bills that Drew's mentioned is Derek Stingley. And of course, you've also got Sauce Gardner, Ahmad Gardner from Cincinnati, who, if he's there, which it doesn't sound like he's going to be, he would also fit the bill as well. But you've got some other players that have been connected to the Vikings. I know Andrew Booth from Clemson has been mentioned there. Trent McDuffie, who's a little bit undersized. I know that there's at least one guy on our team who doesn't like the size of his arms, which is interesting. But in the grand scheme of things, we have seen projected numbers that suggest that smaller arms equals worse play from the cornerback position. So a lot of factors there, Stingley being the obvious one. Now, you could also go wide receiver, as Drew mentioned. Chris Olave is a great route runner. Looks like he's going to be probably the 3rd or 4th wide receiver taken based off of, quote, expert analysis on the draft. So he's probably going to be there as well. That's going to be an option. The other option that I wanted to talk about was the safety position, and Kyle Hamilton specifically, because I don't necessarily think the Vikings have a drastic need at safety right now. They will next year and probably the following year, but as of this season, they should be okay. Keeping in mind, of course, that Harrison Smith is probably going to be Harrison Smith again, a little bit of a dumbed down version from that peak 2017 year, but he's still going to be good. And you do lose your guy starting opposite him to the Carolina Panthers this offseason. So you've got a hole there that you could, in theory, fill with one of the players that you drafted the last couple of years. I know that Cameron Bynum's probably going to be the favorite for that position if you don't draft someone else, but Kyle Hamilton is one that really sticks out. The reason why I want to have this discussion is because Hamilton has been consensus top 3 overall talent for seemingly a year and a half, maybe 2 years now. And when he came out in this draft class, people were saying, this is a guy that you reach for, say in the same way that people have reached for, Kyle Pitts at the tight end position, which is not typically something that goes top 5. People have been connecting the dots and saying this guy should go top 5, but now his positional value and also the numbers that he put up at the combine are in theory weighing him down a little bit to the point where he might slip to number 12. So the discussion has become, if Derek Stingley is sitting there with his injury, right? Stingley coming off of an injury that has, in theory, derailed cornerback careers, still been very good, still very young, a lot of time to progress. And Hamilton, with the question marks that are less about what the film says, because he's actually been on the field and plays a position that we've seen for the Vikings has been a position of need, whether it's Harrison Smith or someone else. What do you do there? Do you think long-term value in a guy like Kyle Hamilton and taking a guy that's fallen way below what many project his draft position should be? Or do you take Stingley and take a bit of a gamble on the health, right? You trust your doctors on your team, of course, but a little bit of a gamble on his health. A little bit of gamble on the younger side probably means he's probably not going to be a stud his rookie season. Or do you go with the more stabilizing force? I mean, what do you do in a position where both these guys are sitting right in front of you and the Vikings could use one or either of them at the very earliest by next year?
Well, I know what Rick Spielman would do. He would trade down.
Yeah. Right.
And that's the other fascinating aspect of this draft is it's going to be completely different, you would think. Vikings probably won't hoard 7th round picks again this year as they have every year in the past. So, you bring up a good point, and I think that's where a lot of you'll get the analytics based positional value ranking versus pure football playing,
right? Not
able to see on a stat sheet type of approach, with Hamilton. So that's the thing about Hamilton is he'll be able to play multiple positions. We talk about playing up at the line of scrimmage, talk about playing back, type of that Harrison Smith type stuff.
He is like Harrison Smith in a lot of ways, literally from the same school.
Right. But you get Stingley and there's so much potential there. He showed in, at LSU prior to kind of the injury concerns. So there's, I kind of am one of those people that, heavily weighs positional value. I know Hamilton's got the versatility and will be a force probably in the league, but I guess I lean Stingley there and take the risk on the injury just because I think if you get a, franchise cornerback, if you will, a guy that can, lock down one side of the field, that's game changing for the NFL today. I mean, you see with the Rams, teams aren't throwing on Jalen Ramsey right now because he's shutting it down. So,
right.
Mm-hmm.
There's also this point too, and this is based off of there's nothing concrete based on this, right? But the trend that we've seen in the past is that when one position goes up in value, its corresponding position tends to go up in value as well, right? So if you think about the quarterback position, when all these quarterbacks started getting $30 million deals, high percentage of guaranteed money, what was the answer? Well, a lot of people started paying edge rushers a shitload of money. TJ Watt getting a huge contract. Danielle Hunter's contract at the time, it looks like a steal now, but he got paid a ton of money early on in his career. Plenty of other examples of teams overcompensating for needing to stop a quarterback. Now, wide receivers are getting paid a ton of money, and cornerback, in theory, is probably the next one, right? If you're going to try to lock down Devontae Adams and you're negotiating against Jalen Ramsey and his agent, what is he going to say? Well, if Adams is getting paid $30 million a year, you better give me $30 million to stop him. If you think I'm the only guy in the league that can stop him, I'm worth that much money. So in a sense, right, like if we're thinking that wide receiver contracts are on their way up and up, cornerback contracts are probably not too far to follow in my eyes. Again, not based off of anything specifically. There's no report on that. There's no,
Yeah.
I mean, we just saw a deal get done for $105 million or $100.5 million for the cornerback in Cleveland. You know, I don't think it's something that's going to be happening immediately, but it's something to consider that these rookie cornerbacks are going to have contract value as well pretty soon, right? So I personally lean Stingley in this debate. You guys know from if you've listened to us talk for a long time that I prefer the cornerback position over just about anything. And I've actually been on board with Mike Zimmer in that regard for a long time, that it's worth taking a player at that position in the first round, especially if you can get tremendous value. And you throw in the fact that Stingley's freshman year, true freshman year, by the way, at LSU was one of the historically greatest freshman seasons of any cornerback of all time. Not only did they win it all, but he was a key factor on that team, causing turnovers, lockdown coverage, man-to-man, press, outside, inside. I mean, the guy did it all when he was 19 years old. And while the injury is concerning, I think that Nick Olson on our team brought up a really good point that whatever the Vikings doctors say on Derek Stingley, that's what I say too. I'm with the Vikings doctors. They, in theory, just brought over the very best medical staff on the planet relative to the NFL. That has been keeping guys healthy at the highest percentage mark over the last 3 years. If the Viking staff looks at Derek Stingley and they're like, you know what, you're good to go. I don't see any long-term concern. That's the guy I'm taking. I'm not trading back.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's had tremendous value literally since he was 19. And it's an injury concern right now. And yes, injuries are very problematic. They throw a wrench into your plans all the time. We saw that happen with Sharif Floyd. We've seen it happen with Dante Culpepper. We've seen it happen with tons of players throughout Vikings history. But we've also seen the latter, where you got Adrian Peterson at number 7 overall because he broke his collarbone, goes on to be the best rusher in Vikings history and one of the best rushers in NFL history. So I don't know. Is there a right answer? Again, I started the entire conversation here by saying I don't think that there is a right answer. But when you look at the value that the cornerback position provides, when you look at all of the nuances, Patrick Peterson being around to, in theory, work with a younger cornerback and teach him how to, play from a fundamental standpoint and not just use his athleticism to gain an advantage. When you look at the LSU guys on the staff, both in the coaching and as well as on the roster itself, I mean, the dots seem to all align for Derek Stingley to be a Viking. Hell, he wore purple and gold last year. So I think it makes a lot of logical sense to take him there, but I'm not going to complain if the Vikings go elsewhere. I think that there is room to trade back, especially if you like multiple guys. Like, let's say Chris Olave, Derek Stingley, Kyle Hamilton all sitting there at 12, and you can get number 14. I don't know which team holds 14 right now, but you can get number 14 to move down 2 spots and pick up a 3rd-round pick in between. I'm not going to hate on that, right? If you don't get Stingley or Olave, then you end up with Kyle Hamilton at 14. That's tremendous value. I'm definitely on board with that type of thinking as well. But
so how about this? Who do you trade up for? Let's say, because I've seen some talk, I think Paul Allen teased it on K-Fan this week, something about the Vikings could move up from 12 to 4. I don't think that's going to happen. But I mean, it's right. And that's kind of where I was going to ask you, like, who's the guy the Vikings move up for in that scenario? Because to your point, like, if that's a move that the Vikings are going to make, it shows some aggression, but clearly there is a premier player that they think that can contribute right now.
So that's a tough question.
Is that Sauce Gardner? I mean, because he could go, I mean, there's top 5 type of discussion on him as well.
So he's the most interesting one, I think, because of the volatility of his draft status. Because first of all, he's a cornerback. Cornerbacks typically go and get taken top 5. So if he does go out and do that, someone must think he's very, very special. Just simple history based off of what the NFL has done. The other piece with Gardner is that a lot of what has made him boom this draft season is his personality and the fact that he's in the news all the time, shockingly, out of Cincinnati. I think that his testing scores are really good. I think his film is tremendous. And I think the fact that he's gotten, veteran players who have spoken to his name, like Richard Sherman, for example, and been like, this guy's going to be really good. That helps put a seed in the mind of a front offices. So I do have inherent questions of, okay, are we talking about Ahmad Gardner that we saw in film at Cincinnati? Or are we talking about Sauce Gardner, who's becoming a superstar before he even gets to the NFL? I don't know. So he's a very interesting player. I probably would not trade up for Sauce Gardner because you could get Stingley, McDuffie, one of these other guys.
So you see those guys as, I mean, not on the same tier, but it's not worth that, multiple pick jump up.
That's what I see.
5 spots or whatever it would be to go get
because
Sauce.
The compensation would end up being, if you were to move from 12 to 4, you probably lose a first next year or a second this year. It's one of those two things, and I think the Vikings need multiple players. So I'm not in the camp that wants to trade up unless you're going to trade up for a quarterback, and I don't see the Vikings doing that. And to be honest with you, Malik Willis is the only one that I would trade up for. Anyone else, I think that you just take him at whatever value you can. I just don't see it this year.
Yeah.
Really, if Kayvon Thibodeau slides, that's another good question, because this is a guy that has been a consensus number 1 overall pick, and we were talking about Stingley being a consensus like top 10, top 15 talent for 3 years. Kayvon Thibodeau has literally been the consensus number 1 overall pick until draft season actually hit.
Yeah, until a couple months ago or 3 months ago,
So if a guy like Kenny slides, especially when you're moving to a 3-4 and you got that bigger frame, 6'4", 254, he seems to make a lot more sense in a 3-4 defense, and he could be a catalyst in your defense. That might be the only guy I would trade up for. If Thibodeau slides to like 8, I'd be interested in moving up 4 spots to get a guy like that. But other than that, Malik Willis, which I there's no part of me that believes the Vikings would trade up for a quarterback after what they've done this offseason. Malik Willis, Kayvon Thibodeau, I think those are the only 2 that I would actually trade.
Yeah, that's a piece I didn't even. We could do a whole podcast on quarterback.
But we don't need to because we re-signed Kirk.
Right. But we could do. I mean, even there's the whole value of the quarterback position and the need for that now, because we spent a lot of time already talking about positional value and cornerback and stuff. But so I think you're right. I kind of agree with both your assessment on Thibodeau, and then also Sauce. I think it would be ambitious and kind of a risky move in a way too. If you're Kwesi, right, to kind of make that trade up in your first draft, you're putting a lot of eggs in one player's basket, and I don't see him making that move. He's been very conservative thus far in his approach overall, so I don't see that up his sleeve. I see, if anything, maybe more trading down to accumulate picks, because I think. People think Rick of Spielman as this kind of guy that's always trading down. But he did trade up to acquire multiple first round picks. I think, was that 3 years in a row he did that? 2012, 2013, 2014. Every year he had
into the first round. He loved to do that too.
Exactly. He had, because Harrison Smith was one of those picks. I believe Cordero Patterson, or maybe he was from the Percy trade, but then they had Sharif Floyd and Xavier Rhodes in that draft. Yep. And then the following year was Anthony Barr and Teddy Bridgewater. So he did both. And so, maybe that's one of the things that the Vikings will do. I mean, if there's a first round talent at the end of the draft, or the first round, maybe it's pick 12 and pick 28 or whatever. Maybe Kwesi goes that route. But I think Stingley, you're hearing a lot of the same chatter, I'm sure, on the other shows you listen to related to the Vikings. But it seems like Stingley is the guy that we like the best here, at least for the first round. But again, I do not want the Vikings to sleep on the wide receiver position. I want them to address it and bring in. In the first 3 rounds, I think you got to go grab a wide receiver, just given where the Vikings are at that position right now. Aging Thielen, Jefferson, obviously a superstar, a top 2 player, but in a few years might be gone. KJ Osborne, solid productive player. Still a little bit uncertain about his long-term status, right? So you kind of need another guy, because you look around the league, wide receivers are making offenses run right now. So I think that's one that they can't sleep on.
Absolutely. So cornerback, we've identified wide receiver. Those are potential 1 and 2 picks. You've also got a 3rd round selection. Vikings, by the way, this season, no 4th round pick, but they got 3 6s and a 7 and a 5 as well, in addition to those 1, 2, and 3 picks. Historically speaking, the Cleveland Browns are, I guess, the closest thing that we can get to what Kwesi was operating at under Andrew Berry. They have not been the type of team to trade up for trade down to accumulate a lot of picks. Last couple of years, basically the status quo, moving around in the middle rounds a little bit. They had a couple 5s last year and a couple 4s. The year before that, of course, they didn't even have the first round pick. They drafted Greedy Williams with their first overall selection in the second round. So I don't think we're going to see the wheeling and dealing slick Rick type stuff that we have seen in the past. I think that part might be dead. That being said, the Vikings do have the ability here to move around a little bit in the middle rounds. I don't see them doing anything on day one, unless it might be to get back into the first round just to acquire that 5th-year option, which is a staple of basically every GM strategy, is that if you really like a guy and you see him there at 29, 30, 31, or 32, and you know that financially speaking, you can get this guy under contract for an extra year at a team option, that's one thing I could potentially see this Kwesi-led front office do. But outside of that, I mean, trading down maybe, but I just don't really see it. From what I've seen, and it could be more Andrew Berry than Kwesi, it's more been about using a collection of picks to get one guy as opposed to using one pick to get a collection of picks. It's been more and it's probably where some of that trade up talk has came from, is that's what the Browns have done recently. And of course, Andrew Berry just made that huge deal for Deshaun Watson, basically saying, screw those picks, right? So I don't really think that Kwesi operates in that same way. But there's no concrete evidence to suggest he does anything other than what Andrew Berry is. And that's what makes this draft so much fun to me, is that while you might still get a cornerback drafted in the first round, like we've been seeing for about a decade now, on and off, you're probably going to see some new nuances in style, in approach. And it's more calculated in terms of what the analytic risk is of taking a guy, which knocks the Derek Stingley claim for what it's worth. So, I don't know if there is a right answer, and that's kind of a good spot to be in, because ultimately this podcast has always sort of leaned best player available as opposed to drafting a position of need and just trying to fill a hole overnight, especially at specific positions like cornerback and quarterback, which, let's just be real here, most of the time it doesn't pan out overnight.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, that's where I kind of fall, is I'm best player available of these positions. And it's not even, doesn't really have anything to do with Vikings roster breakdown necessarily. It's more of like, here are the most valuable positions in football. These are the positions you need to address first, no matter what the state of your roster is. And I think Stingley kind of meets that criteria right now, given where he'll fall in the draft, again, given, what his potential is as a player. Despite those injury risks, I think he can be a star. Star cornerbacks are not easy to find. And I think when you have the chance to potentially grab one like the Vikings do, I think that's a risk you take.
Is there anyone in this draft class? Let's talk like top 30-ish. So if the Vikings move down, theoretically speaking, let's cover all our bases here. If the Vikings move down from 12, they move into the middle of the first round and pick up a second round pick or something like that, right? Is there anyone in this class that really entices you? Like, is there someone that you're like, you know what? If that guy's there at 18, he's a perfect fit for the Vikings? Or is this basically a top-heavy year where the top 10 guys who have been garnering the most attention in the news, top 10, 15-ish, and then there's everyone else? Or is there someone that's worth banging the table for in the middle of the round in the event that you do trade down?
Yeah, that's a good, I mean, so there's a sneaky one that I like. And this, he's been projected kind of all over the map a little bit, but Jordan Davis would be kind of fun because, and that's one of those things that in a 3-4 defense, having that kind of nose tackle, that humongous figure in the middle, right, can be a big benefit, and you need one. And the Vikings, they're very set on this position right now. I'm aware of that. But that's Jordan Davis is a fun personality for one. But I think he has that, he's a ginormous person. And I think that could make him fast. He's a crazy athlete. So right. I think but he has some serious potential to be like a superstar type player. And that's a guy like if maybe he falls a little bit farther than he should, right? The Vikings are trading into the 20s or whatever, and he's still there. Like, I don't see that happening, but in that event, I think that would be really fun, and I'd be there for it. Despite, again, because I do want to emphasize best player available, and I want to emphasize fitting in the scheme, and I think he would fit with the new Vikings' new defense.
It's funny that you say that because I think the last time the Vikings really needed a cornerback was in 2014. Like, obviously, they always seem to need a quarterback, but the last time that where it was like a fixture, the same way it is this year with everyone picking Derek Stingley to the Vikings, was in 2014 when the Vikings took Trey Waynes, I believe. Or
15.
Sorry, that was two. I'm thinking of the year where the Vikings took Anthony Barr and Teddy Bridgewater in the first round in 2014. That was also the same year that Aaron Donald went, right? Now, the Vikings that season were stacked at defensive tackle, or so we thought, right? The belief was that the Vikings were in a good position at defensive tackle. And Aaron Donald was going to be one of those guys who was going to fall into the middle of the first round because of his size. And I'm making this comparison from Aaron Donald over to Jordan Davis because Jordan Davis made the comparison and said that he wants to be like Aaron Donald. He's going to work like Aaron Donald. But my point being here is that the last time that a player like this popped up in the middle of the first round it turned out to be Aaron Donald. We've seen the career that he has had. And the Vikings passed on him for essentially to fill a position of need, which was linebacker, edge rusher at the time in Anthony Barr, and then Teddy Bridgewater later in the first round, the quarterback position. The Vikings could have used it, at that point in the draft. They could have gotten an Aaron Donald in the top 10 right before he was selected by the Rams in the middle of the first round. They opted to go positional need instead, and Anthony Barr has been great. I love Anthony Barr, but he's not Aaron Donald by any stretch of the term. And you see the ramifications or the consequences of taking a position of need just to fill that slot, check it off your box, and feel like you're going to be good. Because anything can happen. Like even a guy with a full bill of health can get hurt the first week of training camp, and all of a sudden that pick looks terrible because you drafted, a position that you needed to fill right now instead of the best player available. That guy goes on injured reserve. All of a sudden people are talking about whoever it is.
And part of this is me and you are both in the frame of mind that the Vikings are. I mean, like you let off the show by kind of saying where the Vikings are in the division and the prospects of making the playoffs that way, which are, I mean, there's validity to that, right? Like the Bears and Lions aren't in good shape right now. The Packers are probably going to be a worse football team than they were last year. And so that does provide some opportunity for the Vikings, but I'm also of the belief that this roster is just not ready and is not nearly good enough to compete. And so I hope the Vikings front office sees that too. And like you're saying right now, doesn't draft for position for this year when turnover happens so often that, positional needs can change drastically year over year. And so that's where the best player available kind of approach comes in.
Absolutely. So something to think about. I mean, Jordan Davis is a lot of fun. I'm glad you brought him up because I don't think he has any business in connection to the Vikings just because of what the Vikings have done at the defensive tackle position the last two free agency periods. But at the same time, I mean, how perfect of a fit could that guy be for a 3-4 unit that's just starting from scratch now? I mean, if you're 345 pounds and you're running, what was it, like a 4.75 or something from that guy? That's Linval Joseph on steroids. That's complete insanity, and that fits perfectly with a unit that's going to be running, 3-4 with two big guys on the edges, and then having Daniil Hunter coming off of the edge and having essentially Jordan Davis as both a clogger and a pass rusher. I mean, the fit's really nice, folks. I know it's not a need, but the fit is definitely really nice. And it just so happens that you've got a Rams coaching staff here to coach him if you were to land here. So I don't know. I like that one. I think that's a good little sneaky pick that would make a lot of sense for the Vikings when everyone's talking about the obvious. I think you're going to continue to hear about the cornerback position. You're going to continue to hear about interior offensive line in the middle of rounds. But as far as drafting the best player available, I mean, there's a couple of these Georgia guys. I mean, it's not just Jordan Davis. I mean, you got Trayvon Walker who would look nice in purple as well. I mean, some of these athletes this year, man, like they don't necessarily have the pedigree that in terms of like production, but the overall ability and the likeness to some superstars in the league right now Like you see people talking about Garrett Wilson from Ohio State. I don't think he's nearly as polished of a player as Chris Olave, who has been mentioned earlier. But the ability to translate that skill set to the NFL now seems to fit better than ever. And for that reason, he ends up jumping over these guys like Drake London and Chris Olave, who have had, a more complete college career, if you will, to simplify it, I suppose. So a lot of different ways the Vikings can go. And ultimately, I think for me personally, the one thing I don't want is I don't want them to trade up. And that's, coming kind of bring this conversation full circle. You could do just about anything and it's going to be okay, pretty much. Kwesi's in a very good position where he can draft whatever and we'll see the results and we'll deal with it down the line. This isn't like a high intensity draft, despite the fact that it is his first one. But if you're able to make a hit here, and it doesn't necessarily need to be in a hit for a position for 2022. If it's a position for 2023, 2024, where this team is more likely to be in a position to contend, that actually makes more sense in my mind. The only thing that the Vikings can't do here is kneecap their future. That's the only thing. And so to me, if you trade up, you put yourself in a position next year where all of a sudden you're going to start thinking about drafting a quarterback again. The future might be kneecap, exactly. You might want to draft a quarterback next year. I think that's going to be likely based off of what I've seen from Kirk Cousins and based off what I'm expecting from him this year. I think the Vikings will be drafting a quarterback next summer. I don't want to try to do that without a first round pick. That's where I'm at. So don't trade away the future to get a guy that's going to help you right now, just so you can move to 10-6 and get a wild card slot and get eliminated in the first round.
Right.
Try to compete with the Packers this year. Just don't do that. Anything else? In my head, best player available. I mean, I think that Derek Stingley at 12 is very close to the best player available anyways. You can kill two birds with one stone in a sense by getting a cornerback as well and a guy that fits with the LSU staff, Patrick Peterson and so forth. I think that's great. Hell, I would stick with that plan if that's the plan of attack. But anything other than kneecapping your future is a win for me this Vikings season.
Yeah, I have nothing else to add. I mean, I'm with you because I feel the same way. Like you can't put all this is not a win now team, despite what the team might be telling you. So I'm all in on not breaking the bank for the future right now.
Yeah. That's basically what it comes down to. So we're looking at cornerback, wide receiver. If they draft another interior offensive lineman, I will be very unhappy as well.
Yes, that too.
Let me add that to my list of things that I do not want to see happen. No interior offensive lineman drafted before 25 overall. If you trade down and you end up getting one in 26, 27 range, okay, that's fine. That's fine with me. But nothing in the top 15 for sure. I don't want to hear any Garrett Bradbury stuff. I don't need any of that post-traumatic stuff coming up for me this draft season. Stick to your guns. I think Kwesi's smarter. I think Kwesi is a hell of a lot smarter than all of us, and he's going to contribute. He's going to come take all of this information full circle, and I trust his ability to do a good job in this draft class. The only thing that concerns me is what up top is telling him, and that's ownership saying, "Hey, we're going to try to win this year. We're going to try to sell tickets." I think we've already seen that from their approach this offseason. Go up and get the guy that you want. Scratch the future. Just don't do that. Don't do that, and don't take it. Oh, let's round it out here. No punters. Do not draft a punter. If I see that, I would be pissed too. So those are my three keys to victory. Do not trade up and mortgage the future. Do not draft an interior offensive lineman within the first 25 or so picks. And do not draft a punter or a kicker. I will lose my mind. I don't care what anyone else tells you.
I like it.
This podcast, we do not draft punters. That does not happen, period. So anything else that we did not cover here in this 40 minutes or so of breaking down the draft from a very general angle?
Right.
Like I said at the top of the show, the rest of the guys in the Climb in the Pocket team, this is their shit. They live for this stuff. Listen to them talk about the intricacies of the draft.
I mean, one of our own is on ESPN every day talking about it.
You could talk.
Jordan Reed.
Yeah, you could listen to Jordan talk about it. I know that he's doing great stuff with Matt Miller at ESPN too. That's super fun. The rest of the Climb in the Pocket team, I mean, man, these guys have been breaking down the draft stuff for the last 3 weeks. Where Drew and I have been on our own personal little podcasting vacations, and they've gone through the intricacies of all these individual players. But I guess from a general vantage point for me, it's just more about just keep yourself in line. Don't do anything stupid. That's where I'm at. And you can go to Tyler Furness or the rest of the team for your in-depth preview of what Derek Stingley would look like in press coverage playing opposite of Patrick Peterson. So thank you guys for tuning in. We appreciate you listening to us here. We'll be back next week, the following week, and so forth to go over what the Vikings have done and the overall the overall picture that Kwesi is painting for the Vikings' future. We'll see how that goes. But thank you guys for joining us, and we'll catch you next week.